Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Know Before You Go, the Cotswolds, Exploring English Nature, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Lianne Thompson. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you all so much for being here today. Over to you, Lianne.
Thanks so much. Welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk through the Cotswolds program, which had its first year last year. It was really exciting to finally get it underway. It was supposed to start in 2020, but we had a couple years of delays, of course, due to COVID. So last spring we got to launch the program and it was loads and loads of fun. We've actually made some changes to the itinerary this year as well. So we'll be talking about some new things that we've added to the itinerary that I think are just going to be amazing additions, and the program is just kind of growing and become absolutely fantastic. So if you are interested in the program or maybe already signed up, hopefully we'll be able to answer a bunch of your questions about what you can expect on the trip itself. To start, I guess, though, I should introduce myself. I do have my camera off. I am still, if you watched, I did a webinar about 2 weeks ago and complained about this as well. I'm still in recovery from a very lovely cold virus thing that's kind of latched and hold on to me. So I do apologize if I cough through some of this webinar, but I still wanted to be here and share all of this with you guys. So my name is Lianne Thompson. I was actually born in England. I don't have the fun British accent, but I was born there, moved over to Canada, which is where I still live, when I was quite young, but I did grow up in a British family and, went back to England as well as Scotland, which is where my mom was from, lots of times as I grew up. And so England has always kind of had a very near and dear spot in my heart. And it was really exciting to be able to share that. And it was kind of funny growing up and learning all of the different cultural things, growing up in Canada, but still growing up with a lot of British culture, and then getting to kind of share that and relive and relearn that some of that is British culture versus North American culture. So I do still live in Canada. I am out in British Columbia, but kind of bounced around a whole lot. Been in Ontario, in Manitoba, now out in BC. Have a couple of degrees, but also started with NatHab back in 2018. Our polar bear programs was the first ones that I started with. I also guide the Northern Lights programs there. Doing some belugas there this summer as well. The Cotswolds program, the Canadian Rockies, that new program I run as well, one of the ELs on that, and then Iceland. So I do bounce around a lot and I love it. It's super fun going into all of these different places and learning lots and getting to kind of share that things that I'm passionate about with the NatHab guests. So thanks for joining me, and hopefully you'll get to hear some of the things that I'm passionate about today. We'll start off with just like, what is the Cotswolds? Where is it? So in the map on the left-hand side, UK, we see England, Wales, parts of Scotland as well. And so you can kind of, most people will kind of have an idea of where London is. So landing in London, the airport's there. We'll head over to Oxford, and then that area that's covered in green and kind of expanded on the right-hand side there is the area known as the Cotswolds. So it is the area, it's an area of outstanding natural beauty. It's a fairly big area, but not too much for us to cover in, the week or so that we are there. But we do cover quite a bit of ground because there's just so much to see here. Lots of variety in history, in gardens, in nature, lots of stuff that we want to share with you. But that green area is kind of where we are going to be spending the bulk of our time, almost all of our time when we are here on this journey. So we'll kind of talk a little bit more about what we can expect and what we're going to do on there. But first off, we can start with just arrivals. So getting into London Heathrow Airport, it is, a pretty large airport, and you'll go through customs. It can be quite busy. So we do recommend getting in a bit early. We are going to be dealing with, most likely anyways, that you'll have a time change, especially if you're coming over from North America. Potentially where you are can be quite a large time change. So getting in early, a day or two early, can help adjust to that time change, but also deal with flight delays. If you've done a bunch of flying at all recently, and I have, and been on programs where people haven't been able to make it to the program just because of delays and cancellations. So give yourself that nice buffer. It just kind of helps to reduce the stress of travel if you do that. And then you've got plenty of time to kind of sort through things. If you do arrive on day one, or you're going straight to our hotel that we use in Oxford, then the transfer will be available to you. Lots of information about it will exist in the pre-departure briefing, because Heathrow is such a large airport. Depending on when you come in and where you're arriving from, where you'll meet the transfer driver can be quite different. So do ask your adventure specialist, check the PDB, and make sure that you kind of know that information. But you'll go through customs, and then if you are getting one of the transfers, there'll be a driver that's outside waiting for you. And then you'll get transferred straight over to Oxford, which is where our journey does begin. If you do come to Oxford early, then there's lots to do there. The transfer from the airport over to Oxford, an hour, hour and a half maybe, can be a bit longer sometimes depending on traffic, so depending on the time of day, but not too long. Can kind of sit back and relax. And then if you do arrive in Oxford beforehand, there's loads to do. It's a very walkable place, which is really great. Lots of restaurants. There's a great foodie scene that exists there. Historic pubs, if you want to go get a pint right off the bat. There is a pub that exists in Oxford that's like almost 800 years old that it's been a pub for. So lots of really incredible places to do that. Museums as well. The Ashmolean Museum is right across the street from the hotel that we stay at, which is actually, it's Britain's oldest public museum. There's botanical gardens nearby, arboretums, places to go for a walk, distillery tours, open air markets. There's loads to do in Oxford. So if you did decide that you wanted to kind of come a day or two in advance, there's lots to kind of keep you entertained there. Our home base that we do have in Oxford is the Randolph Hotel. So it's where we will meet our group for the first time. So that's kind of where we're situated. It actually opened in 1866, so a pretty old hotel. And you might be able to see in the bottom left-hand side, just kind of a picture of one of the rooms. They will all look different, but it is kind of some more of this historic decor. It's quite different than some of the decor that we might be used to in our kind of more modernized, I guess, hotels. They're very modern. Several of these rooms and hotels that we've been in through, they've gone through recent renovations. They're very lovely, but they've just gone for this kind of more older historic decor, which can be a little bit louder, I would say, with some of the color palettes, but it really just kind of gets you right into the culture of the area. So the hotel is wonderfully comfortable, and it'll be a great home base for our time in Oxford. And just a quick note on some of the other hotels that we're going to be at. We do move several times throughout the itinerary, so we do start in Oxford, have our home base there, just if you've kind of come in prior to, but we do head into the Cotswolds, because if you remember that map, Oxford was just on the outside of the Cotswolds, so we'll head into the Cotswolds. And unlike some of our other itineraries, if you've traveled with NatHab before, you know, we're staying in very remote places with limited access to supplies and whatnot, so they can be pretty bare basics for hotels, depending on where you are. This is not so true when you go to the Cotswolds. They're basically luxury hotels and manors and mansions that have beautiful grounds, stunning rooms, dining areas. Yeah, they can become very, very luxurious. So throughout our time, sorry, we do stay at kind of three main hotels. So one in Minster Mill, we stay at the Calcott Spa in Tetbury, and then Lords of the Manor in Upper Slaughter. So there is lots of different hotels that we'll stay at, and each of them kind of has like a different thing to offer. So some of the grounds are super large, and you can kind of go wander around these areas, and there's fire pits and, you know, streams that run through where locals come and go fishing. And another one of the hotels has a really beautiful spa that you can go to with hot tubs and steam rooms and saunas, and other ones are kind of more right in town, and we'll still have beautiful gardens outside, but you can kind of go for a little walk in town. All of them are really stunningly beautiful, and you'll definitely have a great night's sleep. One of the best showers I've ever had, it was a big joke last year, we would talk about showers, occurred in one of these hotels. Just great water pressure. I became very passionate about it. It was really great. Hotels are really awesome. There isn't elevators really, because the hotels are kind of existing on one or two levels, so minimal stairs, but there is a lot of like long corridors and long hallways that do exist to get to these rooms. So it's kind of fun. You kind of feel a bit like you're going back in time, and you're hanging out in the manors of these of this very wealthy family, and I don't know, it's just kind of cool to be kind of submersed in that world for a little while when we are staying there. One of the other very important things to think about when we talk about travel is food, of course. It's an ADHAB trip, so you know there's going to be plenty and plenty of food offered. And oftentimes people think about England and they go, oh, you know, pub style food, and that might not be that interesting to you. It might be very interesting to you, but if you think about British pubs, Cotswolds has become like a foodie paradise. Amazing restaurants, talented chefs in some of these very historic, famous pubs. Some of them have links to like authors and historians who hung out there hundreds of years ago. And oftentimes these places are also using a lot of local produce and other products. And it's really amazing that the bulk of our meals can often be found grown and whatnot from within a few hundred miles from where you're eating it. So we do get to do a lot of these local farm to table type meals, which I think is just spectacular. And honestly, agriculture becomes a big point that we'll talk about. I'll talk about it in this webinar, but also throughout the duration of the trip, but becoming, yeah, in this like foodie paradise area. And we've worked really hard to try and find a balance between spending time in these like classic British pubs, to doing high teas at fancy gardens, to doing, you know, shared boards and cheese platters and kind of lighter lunches and all of it trying to be really nutritious, but there's plenty of it. So come hungry. I would strongly recommend. There's lots for us to eat as we go throughout there, but the food is absolutely fabulous. I think one more point before we get kind of diving into the itinerary itself is just the vehicles. So we do use smaller vehicles when we are here. So this is just kind of an example, 9-seater ones. We'll have more than one vehicle for most of the groups because they're obviously much larger than 9 people. And we want to make sure that there is space in there for everyone. So we won't ram 9 people into a 9-seater. We'll make sure that there's plenty of space for everybody in there. But small vehicles is actually quite key for us getting around in the Cotswolds. If you go, you'll see it. If you've already been, you know it. Small, narrow, winding roads. They are 2-way roads, but look one way. That is the width of them. And then you'll just see these kind of little offshoots where you have to pull over to the side to let someone pass. And so if we were driving around in these massive vehicles, it simply wouldn't work. We also wouldn't really be able to get to all the places that we want to go. So these smaller vehicles are really key to making sure that we can maneuver around and get to everywhere that we need to go and see as much of this countryside as we can. So it's kind of a wonderful time for you to sit back and like take in the beautiful scenery because it's really stunning. We've also designed the itinerary to try and reduce drive times for a lot of it. So, you know, a lot of it will be maybe 10, 20, 30-minute drives. There are a couple of longer ones in there, but typically we try to make the drives quite quick so that we're not spending time in the vehicles because we really want to make sure that we're exploring the Cotswolds in the way that it's supposed to be. So on foot and getting off and seeing all of these areas. But this is just kind of an example of one of the vehicles that will be in there. All right, itinerary stuff. So you'll land in London, we'll get over to Oxford, and then we do meet for an afternoon. And this is one of the reasons why landing early is also really helpful because we do start with an afternoon walk. So we'll meet our group, have a little welcome orientation, and then we go for a walk in Oxford itself. So here we do meet with one of the like a local tour guide here, and that's really important because there's so much history in Oxford that people it's kind of their jobs and their passion is to learn and know everything about Oxford. So we'll be meeting local guides, and each time we do one of these tours, it's going to be different because they have to design the tour that we'll be on for a couple of hours. We'll be on our feet that whole time, so comfortable shoes, lots of energy is really important. But each of the times that we do, it's going to be different because it depends on what's open and what's available that we can actually get to. But the University of Oxford, Oxford was founded, they have evidence of teachings as early as 1096. So it's actually the second oldest university in continuous operation. So a very old university, and it is divided into 39 different colleges that all have kind of different academic departments. So if you are a student that is going to the University of Oxford, you do belong to a college. So the colleges will be like New College, Trinity College, Pembroke College. There's a whole bunch of them, 39. And each college itself is kind of like its own little entity. So in that college, there's bedrooms, there's dining rooms, there's a chapel, libraries, common areas for people to hang out. And all of them are kind of designed in a square. So they've got a center courtyard in there, which does mean that that's why it's such limited access, because oftentimes these courtyards and the entire colleges are closed to visitors. You can't just go in. Because students are studying for exams or have ceremonies and all of these things that are going on. So they're only open at certain times, which is why we have the local guides who know when things are open and where we can get and see. But the goal of each of these tours is to try to get into one of these colleges so we can go and see all of these different areas, see some of the modern areas, see some of the historic areas, many of them obviously very old. And if you're not already familiar, the Oxford, the entire area of Oxford, the University of Oxford, they're definitely quite popular for Hollywood. So there's lots of movies and things that have been shot here. Harry Potter, if you're a Harry Potter fan or have people in your family that are Harry Potter fans, a lot of it was actually shot here in Oxford. Alice in Wonderland has connections to the area as well. So lots of Hollywood things that can go on here too. So it's really cool because we'll meet our guides, and especially if you've done some research in advance and you're like, hey, I really want to know where this scene in Harry Potter was shot or something like that, you can ask them, and then they can try and cater those, our tour, to what people are really interested in. But lots to share, lots to see. And as I said, we will be on our feet for a couple of hours. So good shoes, good sturdy shoes are going to be very helpful for that. So that's kind of our first activity that we do as a group, is heading into or heading around, walking around Oxford and learning a lot about that area. And then we do head in and go straight into the Cotswolds. So this is kind of our first afternoon. We head in, go to Minster Mill, our first hotel, and we'll have our first dinner, our welcome dinner kind of all together. And then the next day is when we start our like full list of activities. So this is just kind of day one. Throughout our time here in the Cotswolds, we do go on a lot of walks. And it's one of the things that makes our itinerary this itinerary very unique, is that it's exploring the Cotswolds by foot. It's very British. It's very English. People go out walking all the time. And when we would go out and do these walks, we'll encounter loads of locals because they're just going out and enjoying all these trails themselves. The Cotswolds area has over 3,000 miles of walking trails. So loads and loads of places to walk. People will stumble upon us, and we're a larger group, you know, we've got 10 to 15 of us kind of all walking around together. And so oftentimes we get stopped and people go, well, what are you doing? And what are you exploring? And it's such an amazing way to meet some locals, and they'll tell us about, you know, their history or their time growing up here, and they just absolutely love and adore where they live. You'll also meet lots of dogs. Dogs are very welcome in all parts of England. So we'll see dogs on the trails, we'll see dogs in pubs and restaurants, we'll see them all over the place. So yeah, it's a super fun way to explore and see Cotswolds. We obviously won't be doing 3,000 miles. Each of the hikes that we could do would be up to 3 miles, and we could do several of them in a day. We will be on our feet a lot in this itinerary, because whether it's going to walks or going for walks or exploring gardens, some of these historic sites that I'll talk about too, we'll be on our feet for a lot of it. So again, comfortable shoes, they're going to be super, super important here. There's also minimal elevation when we are hanging out and like wandering through here. It's a lot of rolling hills, so the hikes are not super challenging. We'll stroll through, we talk about, you know, historic buildings that we're seeing, or take in these beautiful wildflower fields, and even some of these old features that we can see from like historic farming use. So we'll stop and have talks and explore, and give lots of time for us to kind of take in the area. And we'll also be walking through many of these fields. They don't look, or the walks that we do, they don't look like walks that we would think of in North America. You know, I guide the Canadian Rockies once, and I spent a lot of time hiking in this area. It's where I live, in this area of BC, and into Alberta I'll duck into as well. And you know, we're used to, okay, well, there's a parking lot and a trailhead and a very well-defined path and this specific thing, and it's not like that in England. There's just kind of walking trails all over the place. There'll be part of the trails walking walking through town. Part of the trail is going through a churchyard. Part of the trail is going through pasture fields. So there will be, horses and cows and sheep that are all over the place, and we'll be going through them. So of course, then this can make the fields a little bit messy. There'll be poop and wet and muddy areas on the trails. Did I mention good shoes, good waterproof shoes? They'll be good for you there. But these livestock animals also act as like natural lawnmowers, so they keep the land in wonderful condition. There's lots of birds and butterflies and flowers and a whole host of other insects that come in and here and kind of experience everything because of the fact that there's natural fertilizers and grooming that's kind of happening. But because we are walking through areas that are managing live animals, we cannot rely on people to close gates all the time. And England does not rely on you to close gates all the time. So in fact, they have many of these things here. So these are called stiles. And so essentially this will be the way that we'll move from one field to another or exiting and entering fields. So they come in various different ways, but essentially we have to climb over these because people won't always close gates, and because people want to keep their sheep where their sheep belong, they have these, and this is how we move over. So, you will need to have some good knee and hip mobility to climb over these things. Some of them can look a little intimidating. They're not too bad. We'll be there to help and assist as well, and we certainly managed them quite easily last year. But if that hip and knee mobility is something that you do struggle with, then the walks will not be something that you're able to do, because you simply have to go over these things in order to complete some of the walks that we'll go and do. So yeah, it's kind of a unique feature of walking in England. I just find it really fascinating. We'll also, as I said, be walking through towns when we go through many of these walks as well. And so, people do travel all over the world, or from all over the world, to see these little villages. The Cotswold stone, which you can see here, is used to build these homes. It's this like honey-colored limestone that people, again, they come and see because they want to look at these really historic and beautiful homes that have been built, some of them hundreds of years ago, even more modern ones still using these stones. We can see thatched roofs. I've seen them in construction getting repaired, but all of these thatched roofs being used to help keep their homes dry and insulated. And one thing to consider is when we're going through, obviously, these very idyllic villages, that there are areas where people have asked not to take photos. Because if you imagine living in some of these very popular villages, where hundreds and hundreds of people are coming through and constantly taking pictures of your homes. Some of the homes, they do have signs up that do ask you not to take photos, even down entire stretches of street. So being cognizant of that and just being really respectful of the fact that people do live here. This is their homes. And so being respectful of that. But also, I think that's a wonderful opportunity to stop being behind your camera or behind your phone, whatever it is that you're using to take photos, and just like really feel these like historic places that you're walking in. There's, streams that are running through and homes that are coated in wildflowers, and it's just really beautiful. So I think it's also a great opportunity to kind of stop and just take it all in. So the towns and villages, of course, they're historic, but we do also go to several different historic places. So many of these are actually run by the National Trust. So this is a charity and membership organization that essentially wants to preserve lands and buildings, essentially, that are of beauty or historic interest, is kind of what their kind of mission is. So they have something like over 500 different properties, and it'll have homes and castles and archaeological areas, monuments, gardens, parks, nature reserves, a whole bunch of different stuff. And one of the things that you'll also see when we go to England is that, we've got the National Trust, there's also the Wildlife Trust, there's all of these different trusts and entities that are working to protect and restore, but they have a massive volunteer base, like incredibly massive. It's insane to think about how many hours, hundreds and hundreds of hours, that people pour into volunteering. And they just are people who come and they want to give you a tour of Chedworth Roman Villa because they're so passionate about the history, about nature, about the area. So we'll meet a lot of locals, again, people who live here and are just really passionate about their subjects. So one of the historic places that we do go to is Chedworth Roman Villa. So in the bottom right-hand picture, you can kind of see what this would have looked like. So it is an old, very, very elaborate Roman villa built in, from the 2nd to the 5th century, so many, many, many years ago. And that bottom right-hand picture kind of gives you an idea of what it might have looked like in its heyday and all of its glory. But it's also incredible to hear about like kind of how modernized it was. So in this whole area, you know, they have dining areas, they have baths, they have warm baths, dry heat baths, damp heat, bedrooms, dining rooms. All of this is very elaborate that are there. And the top right-hand picture, you can see some of the mosaics. So they'll have dining rooms that have very intricate mosaic patterns, and all of this was kind of uncovered one day. All of this history that was underneath the ground, and it's suspected that underneath the feet, you can see pictures of people walking around here, that possibly underneath the feet of those people, there's probably more. There's more mosaics, but then you have to consider of how you protect everything, and they've had to build new structures on top so that they can protect some of these mosaics. And when we do this tour, we'll learn a lot more about that stuff. The bottom left-hand picture, this will be one of the rooms, and you can see it. We're kind of looking at the base level there, all of those pillars. There would be a flooring over top of it, and it was their way of doing underground heating. So again, just so elaborate and so well thought out, and things that we use now with underfloor heating, very different than the way that they used to do it, but all of the things that they would do there. It's just really incredible. And oftentimes we are here with a gentleman named Roger Box, who is a volunteer, but it loves our groups because people come and they're so excited and so passionate and ask such amazing questions. We created a Roger Box fan club essentially last year because he's just so incredible at it and is so knowledgeable about all of it. So we'll hear some of the history, and it's really important to kind of get a base understanding of like the history and culture, and it introduces, you know, why the road system exists the way that it does in England, and some of the culture and whatnot, and it helps to kind of get that base kind of understanding of England. One of the other National Trust places that we go to is a place called Woodchester Mansion. So this is an unfinished Victorian Gothic home. Construction started actually in 1857, but stopped by the mid-1860s. And we look at this beautiful home and you think, wow, that is stunning. And it is stunning. But when you go inside, it's actually completely unfinished. So entire floors and ceilings are missing. There's unplastered walls, tools left behind. It has a very different feel from the outside to the inside. If you've watched the show The Crown, there's areas or there's scenes in The Crown that were shot in and around the mansion, on the property and everything like that. So there is a lot of history to go through here. We will get a building tour. So we'll hear about, you know, some of the design, the construction, what happened, the history of things that were going on. And we will also do a walk on the property too. So it is a huge area, lots of trails that can go through here. And there's a lot of, there's a huge diversity of wildlife, because in and around Woodchester Mansion at the Woodchester Estate area, there is woodlands, grasslands, wetlands. So because we have different kind of ecosystems, there's a massive diversity of butterflies and moths, and there's rare snails that exist. There's birds, you know, hawks and owls and waterfowl. A whole bunch of things kind of exist here. They've even got like a long-term study going on about bovine tuberculosis that happens in badgers. And there's deer that you can find on the property. So we will go for a walk on the property. But one of my favorite parts about walking on this property is like just kind of taking in the beauty of it. This was not far from the mansion, and we just went for this walk, came across this, like went around a corner and just came across this massive field. This is garlic that had flowered, so it was quite fragrant. It smelled amazing, but like huge fields and massive areas just full of flowers. And it's something that we'll see in a lot of areas that we go in the park. Of course, different times of year, different things will be flowering, but our entire group like came across this corner and we were all just in awe, like just got silent because it was just so beautiful. A picture, a video, it won't manage to capture it, but it was absolutely stunning. So we'll still enjoy some time in this property. I'll come back to this in a bit when I talk about wildlife, but this is also a place where there is bats that are roosting in the attic of this mansion itself. And I'm going to circle back to that just when I kind of dive in a couple minutes about wildlife. But before we do that, I do want to talk about one of the other things that we do on the trip is visiting gardens. So we've got 3 main gardens that we go to, Highgrove, so King Charles, his place, Painswick, as well as Hidcote. So all of these gardens, they are very different, and we'll go to each of them and we'll get our own private tours of the areas. And people might often ask as well of like, well, what's the best time of year to go and enjoy the gardens? And the answer is all year. They're designed very carefully and very meticulously so that at all times of year, spring, summer, fall, the whole times that we're there, there's plenty to enjoy in the gardens. Different things are blooming at different times. But there'll be, greenhouses as well as, very well manicured areas. There's also parts of some of the gardens that are just completely wild. Some of those were like my favorite areas, but they're stunning and they're really beautiful. So every time we go there, we will be guided around by, a local gardener or a volunteer. All of them have a wealth of knowledge and will share. The fact that they can ID so many of these plants, I find that amazing, because of course, many of these plants are not local. They're coming from all over the place, but England and their gardens, they do love them. So it certainly is important for us to be kind of exploring and experiencing them as much as we can. And when we are at Highgrove is when we do also stop and have our, our afternoon tea. So have tea and little sandwiches and desserts and pastries and stuff. And yeah, it's a fun time. We just get to feel fancy and wander around and go see all of these beautiful, beautiful areas. So the gardens, again, we'll be on our feet when we're doing this. So lots of time, again, spent on our feet. So we do go around on these tours and an hour to 2 hours each of these tours, but they're kind of spread out. And each of the gardens is also designed very differently. So, no garden is quite like the other. So it's really fun for us to visit all of these different places. But yeah, we've got pubs, we've got gardens and walks and historic buildings, but it's an AdHab trip. So of course, people come wanting nature and wanting wildlife. And if you're familiar with England, you might be familiar with the fact that wildlife, there's not a lot of wildlife that exists in England. They used to have bears and wolves and beavers and lynx and all of these different animals, many of them hunted to extinction, some reintroduction projects happening, some proposed to happen. But wildlife is really hard to find in England because of the massive agriculture and population growth that happened. The Industrial Revolution, it essentially wiped out a lot of the wildlife that existed. So we will find wildlife, of course. We're going to go and find various types of wildlife, but we're also going to talk about like where to go from here. And it's one of my favorite parts about this trip is just kind of going more in depth about where to go from here. So I said at that mansion, Woodchester mansion, I'd come back to bats. So this is me coming back to bats. So one of the things that we do when we are at the mansion, we go for a walk on the grounds, we go for a tour of the mansion itself. We actually have dinner at the mansion. And then we do so because we're waiting for dusk to happen. So in the in the attic of the mansion, they do have greater and lesser horseshoe bats, lots of them that are up there. And it's essentially a maternity roost for these bats. So it's estimated that there's about 200 greater horseshoe bats, other species as well. And one of the things that's so fascinating is that this colony of bats, of the greater horseshoe bats, have been studied by one individual, Dr. Roger Ransom, since 1959. It is the longest continuous study of any mammal by a single person in the world. And of course, at this point, there's lots of other people that are helping with this, but it does mean that it is an animal that has been studied and researched, and people are, curious about how we can help conserve these bat species. If you're familiar, bat decline is kind of happening all over the place, but certainly here in England. And so here they've got bats on live feed cameras. So after dinner, we actually go upstairs, not into the maternity attic. We don't go in there, but we do go to an area where they've got some of the research and information, and one of the people who works with the bats and is part of all of this research and education program will introduce us to the program that they're doing. We'll see them on camera as they're hanging out in the attic, and then at that point we actually head back downstairs because when dusk happens, the bats come out and they fly out of the attic, and they'll go through the different corridors of the mansion itself because they're wanting to get outside so that they can go and feed on all of the insects. And so when we do this, we do have, you have an option of where you want to stand. You can stand outside, you can stand inside, and, sometimes the bats will fly, fairly close to you, sometimes over your head. But we do also have these different frequency detectors. So essentially, different bat species have different frequencies in which they speak at, and we can't really hear that with our ears. It's that echolocation frequency that's happening. And so we can program the different, like our frequency detectors to different levels of frequency, and we can also figure out how many bat species we might be listening to. And I'm going to be quiet, and we tested this before, so hopefully this happens. But this video is us standing inside, and you can actually hear the bats at their different frequencies. So I'm going to quiet down, and hopefully you can hear this. Also just see me being excited and giggling like a child. Really cool though, you can kind of hear the bats in a way that we would not have been able to before. And it's also a really cool study just because bat species, as I've said, they've drastically declined. So this population here, they estimated that, in the early 1900s, there would be like 300,000 individual greater horseshoe bats in the UK. Today, they guess that it's about 9,000. So from 300,000 to 9,000, it's a massive, massive decline. And they were kind of more living in caves, but now they are kind of living more and roosting in these old homes and churches and buildings and all of that. And so it is really important for us to be studying, because these guys, they do, help with control of insects and a whole bunch of things that they do. And of course, agriculture and the use of pesticides has led largely to the decline. And one of the reasons why the population here at the Woodchester Mansion does so well is because they actually don't use dewormers on the cattle that are around the mansion. So it means when they poop, there's plenty of bugs. So there's lots of food that's there for the bats. So really cool experience. Sometimes, you can see in this video, we're inside the mansion itself. Sometimes they'll pop out, one or two will pop out of this corridor that's come from upstairs and fly over our heads and head outside. So you can choose to be inside, you can choose to be outside with the frequency detectors. There's a whole lot of options for that. And yeah, it's really, really cool. More animals. We'll talk about birds now. We'll shift gears. We do actually go for a dawn chorus walk. So if this is not something that you're familiar with, we do get up very, very early. It is dawn after all. And we go out again with a local guide. You can see he's got pictures there. He can ID any bird by sound. He can sit there and hear 5 different birds and isolate them and know exactly what bird it is, and which is just fascinating because there's so many different bird species that come in. And also, different birds will have different bird songs at different times of year. So it's just incredible that he has that ability to do that. He even has like a pen that he can click on, and then he'll play the specific thing that he's listening to, show you a picture, and then we can stop and listen, and you'll be able to isolate and hear what it is that he's hearing. So we get up bright and early. We serve coffee before we go and do this. This is on the grounds of the hotel as well. So it's very simple. Get up, put on some clothes, have a coffee, and then we just kind of go for a walk for, a wander or an hour or so, and hear this different bird song. And in the spring, it's really awesome because we do, it's a lot of the breeding calls. So essentially as dawn, as light starts happening, we hear different birds that are all coming in at different times. So different birds sing at different times of when dawn is happening. And again, I'm gonna get quiet here. These are just some of the birds that we hear. So wren, song thrush, gold thrush, house martin, blackbird. I'm going to play an audio clip. There's no video to it, but just kind of that cacophony, which is a word that I learned last year and I just loved it. But just this cacophony of bird songs. In the audio clip, you don't hear it quite as impressive as you do when you're there, but it is still really incredible. So I'm going to play that for a second. Yeah, I just think it's really fascinating. Even if you listen to this, you could probably isolate several different birds that are happening. And again, this bird song, it will change as the hour and a half that you're locking in changes, because different birds will sing at different times. But it's really cool. Also, just getting up at dawn and kind of experiencing all of that can be kind of eerie and misty, and some mornings will be really sunny and nice as the sun comes up. But yeah, it's a really, really cool morning. Very early morning, of course, because you're doing that. We'll also go over to the Slimbridge Wetland Center. And so this is part of the Wild Fowl and Wetlands Trust, which is the WWT there. So the Slimbridge Wetland Center, it is a whole nature reserve area. And it was actually founded by a gentleman named Peter Scott back in 1946. And his goal was that he wanted to find a way to help people connect with nature in a way that they can actually just come and see and observe. So in the Wetland Center itself, there is an area where, there are some captive birds that are being held. There's also breeding programs as well. Lots of conservation that has happened, but there is also this entire wetland area where we go out where it's completely wild birds. So we go out in vehicles like the one that's shown up here, go out with some safari guides. You can go on a safari in England. If that's not a sentence you ever thought that you would hear, there it is. Go out in this safari in England and go and learn about some of the birds and the conservation. David Attenborough, I'm sure you're probably familiar with him. He actually has a famous quote that I will share with you. That is, if there is one place that can be regarded as the birthplace of worldwide conservation, it is surely here at Slimbridge. One of the first captive breeding and release programs actually started here at Slimbridge, which is just really impressive that like here in England, they were actually breeding a goose from Hawaii, captive breeding it here in England, and then releasing them in Hawaii to the point where they're doing quite well in Hawaii now. They've kind of helped save that species. So it was just a really fascinating way of learning about captive breeding programs and how that can be used to help support endangered species. This is also, there's ties to the World Wildlife Fund here. So Peter Scott, again, the guy who started this, he co-founded and was actually the first chairman of WWF, and he is responsible for the drawing of the panda logo that we all know from WWF. So it's just really cool that like such a connection that we've got there, and some of the birds that we might see. So we are in the Severn Estuary when we're here, and it's one of the largest tidal ranges in the world. It's actually a 15-meter tidal change, and so of course when that happens, it's bringing a massive amount of sediment, massive amount of movement of water. And this sediment is deposited all over the estuary and creates a whole wide variety of different habitats: mud flats, salt marshes, grassy ponds, a whole bunch of different things, lots of habitat type. And of course, this brings a variety of different types of birds. Thousands of swans, geese, ducks, lots of birds come, they overwinter here, breeding here in the spring and the summer. There's lots of birds here as well. So this is just, an example of a couple of them: the shelduck, the dunlin, oyster catchers, and then in the bottom there, we've got the crane. So cranes is another really cool conservation program that's actually happening in England, and we can see evidence of it here at the nature reserve. Cranes were once extremely common across England, to the point where there's actually this story about some archbishop back in the 1400s where they had like a roast meal, and they had over 200 cranes that were caught and roasted to be served at this meal. So that's how abundant they were, that they could eat 200 in one meal, and it wasn't really that much of a big deal. But hunting, along with, of course, climate change and draining of marshlands, led essentially to their disappearance. So they disappeared all the way across England about 400 years ago. Then, oddly enough, a trio of migrating birds were actually blown. They found themselves back in England back in 1979, I believe, down in the east coast of England. And since then, since the crane was brought back to England kind of randomly, they've been heavily protected. And then they've done a lot of breeding programs, reintroduction programs, habitat restoration programs. And they have released actually around 100 cranes in the Severn Estuary, which is again where we are here. So it's estimated that there's now 160 to 200 cranes that are living in Britain. So conservation programs like this are just like incredibly valuable. And these birds, this is just a few of them that we can see there. The estuary hosts about 75,000 birds. Over 200 bird species will come here throughout various times of the year. So lots to do here. Of course, it's not just birds. There'll be, insects, otters as well, snakes, loads of flowers as in the habitat too. So it's a really cool place for us to go and spend a morning kind of wandering around this area. But as I said, with the massive decline in much of the animals that existed across England, there's still a lot of limitations in their wildlife. And so here, there's a lot of interconnectedness between people and wildlife, very intertwined. England losing most of its species, but then wanting to figure out how they can restore some of it. And this is some of my favorite parts about this itinerary, is taking problems that exist all over the world, and then they're trying to figure out various ways of remedying that, and how can we help restore biodiversity. But there are two different tactics, right? You can take these areas that have been massively cleared because of agriculture, and we can decide to either completely restore them to what they were before, which is what happened here at Chimney Meadows, or you can take another approach of allowing agriculture and biodiversity to thrive together. So the first approach, again, we'll talk about here at Chimney Meadows. Again, it's a nature reserve, this one as the Wildlife Trust. So we'll meet with one of their volunteers or workers here who've been part of these restoration programs. But essentially, this was not that long ago, back in 2003, a farm, just a working farm. So fields that had wheat and barley planted all over the place. But when it was purchased by the Wildlife Trust, they wanted to restore it to some of its natural glory. So since the 1930s, the UK's lost over 97% of the wildflower meadows. And wildflower meadows used to be a massive amount of the area. So in the Cotswolds alone, about 40% of the area that we're in used to be wildflower meadows. And now it's like 1 to 1.5%. So a massive amount of wildflowers lost. Of course, this is huge for pollinators. So this, agriculture, climate change, grazing, all of that kind of stuff really helped to reduce it. But bringing them back is something that's incredibly important because it can help with carbon storage. It helps reduce the possibility of floods. And of course, it's also habitat for pollinators. So lots of different bees and other pollinators that used to exist. And a lot of those are also suffering as a result of a lack of habitat for them. So areas have done massive restorations in restoring these wildflower meadows. And they're just completely wild and they're stunningly beautiful areas to go through. So that's one of the projects that they did there. Also at Chimney Meadows, they did a wetland restoration project. And so they wanted to help develop ways to keep water on the floodplain. And so again, this had to do a lot with preventing flooding that was happening by allowing these channels and restoring the ecosystem to what it used to be to create this wet and marshy habitat. So because all of that wet marshy habitat can help reduce the chances of nearby flooding to some of these local farms and homes that are nearby. So they were also doing, restoring ways for fish to be able to move throughout these areas. There was a lot of barriers that were impeded. And so they've created all of this stuff that has allowed access. It's opened up like 30 kilometers of river habitat for the fish species. So, and wetlands as well, they're a massive area for carbon storage. So all of these things and restoring these things back to nature and supporting the return of so much of these different species is just so invaluable for trying to help reverse some of the effects of climate change and not in addition to obviously bringing back the biodiversity. So yeah, that's one tactic. Take an area that used to be farmland and restore it back to what it used to be. And we'll hear lots about the projects. They're super proud of what they've managed to accomplish, as they should be. And so we'll hear a lot more about this program. But the other tactic is not to completely eliminate agriculture. After all, the UK has, over 60 million people that are living in the UK. People still need to eat. And, farms is how we get that food. It's how we grow the wheat and the barley and flour for breads and we've got, livestock, sheep, see a lot of sheep all over England. And so all of that stuff is still important. We can't just eliminate farms because then you eliminate food. So we go to Honeydale Farm and go to Farm Ed, where we take a tour of the property and basically learn about how it is that they're trying to have farming and biodiversity work together. And so what they do is they take different areas and they trial different things of, well, can we modify this farming practice slightly and how does that affect and change the wildlife species. And so it's great that it can be done on this kind of smaller scale, but then that information can be shared to farmers in general. Because if you have a massive farming area and someone comes in and goes, well, what you're doing is horrible for biodiversity, you ask them to change everything about what they're doing, that's their livelihood. That's extremely risky. And so this way it can be done on much smaller scale, and then also have education be like a main focus on what they're doing. So farm education. And so they have, local farmers, global farmers, students, researchers, all of this come, and they'll come for different conferences. They'll go for walks on the property. And the idea is that this place is kind of a hub of information about how we can be better stewards, how we can have agriculture work kind of in harmony of having agriculture and biodiversity work together, and it doesn't need to necessarily just be opposing them. So their goals of increasing biodiversity, building better soils that have better nutrients, that nutrient cycling project or initiatives, and all of this using kind of more of a holistic approach. So reversing global trends of our atmospheric carbon, while also still being able to get huge crop yields and lowering costs, having higher resiliency for things as well, having higher resilient crops, healthier livestock. All of that is kind of what they're looking at doing. So they don't use artificial fertilizers or sprays. They do have control plots as well, because this is science and research that they're doing. So in the control plots, it's how people would standardly be doing their farming practices, and so they'll compare it and how all of that works. So this here is just kind of an overview that they'll talk about for what their farm looks like. So in the middle there, we've got some of their buildings, these very eco-friendly buildings. We also have lunch here, and enjoy a beautiful lunch from the cafes, because they've got these polycrubs, these greenhouses where people are growing things in there. They've got CSA program, so essentially community service or supported agriculture, if you're familiar with that, but essentially a program where people pay money and then it helps support the farmers, and they get like a weekly subscription box of things that have come in. But you'll also see here at the top, they've got very different plots that are happening, and that's all these different trials of what it is that they're trying to accomplish here, down from restoring some of the waterways that happened. They have an apiary, loads and loads of stuff that is kind of happening here on there, and evidence of what's kind of going on already. A talk on farm ed, I mean, we go for a tour that's over an hour long. It could be an entirely separate webinar, but some of the things that they're doing is creating these field margins. So again, the restoration of wildflower margins, hedgerows are also really common here in England, but using these margins, that is giving areas for insects and birds to kind of flourish. And so they do bird surveys, and this is just kind of one example of how they've seen a lot of success. And so they've done bird surveys that have been looking at the diversity of bird species on the farm. And so in 2014, when this project began, they estimated that they had about 44 different species. And in just 6 years, they've almost doubled that. They have well over 80 species of birds that are now finding home in here. So again, showing that agriculture can live in harmony in a way that allows agriculture and biodiversity to kind of come together. Okay, I'm running out of time. Sorry. I love this subject, and I think it's incredibly valuable, and I'm super passionate about it. And I think agriculture and biodiversity together is so cool. And there's a lot of take-home things. It's one of the things that I think is so cool about this program is you go to England to learn about England and biodiversity, but it has some of the most concrete take-home things that you can do at home in your daily life as to how to make like a big impact. So we learn a lot about that at Farm Ed, and I'm sure Chimney Meadows is actually one of the new itinerary things. I'm super excited about that. It sounds like an incredible property. So just getting to learn about all of these different ways of restoration. I just think it's such a cool topic, and not something that we really do on many of the other tours to talk about agriculture. So a couple more of the nitty-gritties before we do wrap up. Weather-wise, temperatures are pretty reasonable. Precipitation, of course, can be a factor as well. So when we're considering what it is that we want to have, you want to make sure that you do have rain gear. So have a good proper raincoat. It can rain at any time. I always bring a raincoat with me everywhere I'm going when I'm out in England. Having like quick dry pants, because it's a bit warmer, we don't want to be having a lot of layers of having your waterproof pants on top of a pair of jeans or something. Having quick dry pants is really helpful, just because then if it does get wet, then it's not so bad. I guess I should switch over here. Hiking shoes. So we definitely recommend having a good pair of hiking shoes, but also having a pair of more comfortable shoes. You can certainly have areas that are a bit more clothing that's a bit more dressy, because we will be having dinners and lunches and stuff in some of these very nice places. So you can bring a pair of more comfortable shoes. You can bring a pair of a bit more nice boot shoes. Having shorts can be helpful, but also making sure you've got pants, again, the waterproof coat. Sometimes we do have the chilly mornings, especially like that dawn chorus walk. So even having a hat and a sweater will also be helpful. Trekking poles, you're welcome to bring them if you would like to, because the hikes are pretty easy, the walks are pretty simple. You don't need to, but if you're a person that uses trekking poles at home, then it would certainly be something that would be beneficial for you to have just here in England, just to provide some more of that support. So yeah, bring a variety, but also, I know in the same breath, also try to be cognizant of the fact that we are moving several times, and the more you bring, the more you have to pack, and the more time you have to spend unpacking and repacking. So, trying to bring minimally what you can, but make sure that you've got all of the things that you do need. Also, electrical things. So have an electrical converter. So if you're, bringing your phone chargers, camera battery chargers, all of that kind of stuff, make sure you have a converter, because they do have different plugs that are there. Bathing suit, you can also bring if you're wanting to use some of the spa services that are available there. But you don't have to bring super intense hiking boots, but definitely wearing a pair of boots that your feet are comfortable in, not going to give you blisters, but do provide a level of support. And waterproof is also really helpful. Last thing I'll say is camera gear. What would you like to bring? Cell phones, incredible photos at this point. So I bring my cell phone. I'm a naturalist, so I bring a pair of binoculars basically everywhere I go. I do have a DSLR camera that I will bring, both a telephoto if I'm wanting to do a bunch of bird photography, because we do have those opportunities several times, as well as kind of more of a wide angle for some landscape things. A photographer, like, it's not really that required. I mean, it's never required, but here I think it's an awesome time to submerge yourself in the environment. But that's kind of the camera gear that I do bring. I don't tend to bring a tripod. If you have a very lightweight tripod, and that you're comfortable and familiar with using, then certainly feel free to do that. But I don't tend to see a lot of need for a tripod on the itinerary. But if that's something that really speaks to your soul, then by all means you can feel free to bring that. Okay, I think that's about it. Hopefully I've inspired and gotten you excited for the itinerary. Sorry I took up all the time. Hopefully we have a couple minutes for questions. But yeah, lots to talk about, and it's a really incredible and really cool itinerary that I'm super pumped to happen again this year.
All right, thank you so much. Now, before we start with the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. All right, so let's get to a few of these questions. So let's talk about the styles for a second. So can they be wood or stone, or are they one or the other?
Yeah, all of the above, depending on the ways that the farmers had made them. So some of them, you've got kind of wood steps that you have to climb over, and then on the other side, it'll be the same thing. So you do kind of have to swing over. And then some of them are like stepping stones and are a lot easier, but they need to be designed in a way that people can use them, but animals cannot. So you can't just have a set of stairs, because then animals will figure out how to use that. Sheep climb all over the place, so they'll get there. So there's different varieties, but it does take a level of mobility.
So how high are they?
How high are they? Again, it can be quite variable. Most of them, it's like a couple of feet. So if I would stand on the tallest step, like I could straddle the fence line. So I could be on one side or the other. Most of them are like that. Some of them are a bit shorter, well, many of them are probably easier than that. They'll be higher up, so you've got a lot more room, but a couple feet, some of them.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you for talking about those.
Yeah.
So the hotels look beautiful. So if,
Yes.
say, we have a lot of luggage and there are no elevators, will they be able to help us out with that?
Yes, sorry, that is definitely a part. Yeah, there is help to bring luggage up to rooms and stuff. And honestly, some of the places that we go in, they'll start offloading from the vehicles, and like they get mad at me when I try and help them. They're like, no, go away, we've got this, and they'll go run around. I also find it very endearing because in many of these hotels and manors, they're dressed very properly, like not in full suits, but not far off, and they're lugging around luggage and bringing it all over the place. But yes, there is luggage help. I do still recommend like being cognizant of how much you're bringing, but of course we want to make sure that you do have what you need and are going to be comfortable at all times. So bring what you need for sure. And yes, there is help to bring your stuff to your rooms at the various hotels.
Great. So regarding food, if we are gluten-free or we're vegan, is there going to be food for us to enjoy?
Absolutely. I primarily eat vegetarian, but we had vegans, we had gluten-free folks. Just making sure that we're aware of all of that, and then your expedition leaders and operations team, all of that kind of stuff. We're aware of all the dietaries, but all the dietaries can be met. Of course, if you're a vegan and we're going to a farm and learning a bit about dairy farming and they have cheese, there are not vegan cheese options available at those places, but those are just kind of our sample stops and learning more about the area. But at our meals, yes, we can cover all of the dietaries very easily. Incredible food in England, like incredible.
Great. So how large are the group sizes on the tour?
It is a great question that I don't currently have in my head. I want to say about 12, which is why we end up with more than one of those vehicles. Yeah, I believe it's 11 or 12. Sorry, I do several different itineraries and they all have different sizes, but I think it's 12. Yeah, so like a pretty small group in terms of making sure that we're getting to have those moments in nature where we don't feel like we're full of a crowd. But yeah, they can be split into 2 different vehicles, and each vehicle will have someone on there who is doing interpretation and can talk about some of the things that you're seeing in the area. And sorry, I'm just seeing I'm getting messaged by the trip owner saying 12 is the max number of people. So 12 is the number there. Yeah, so you'll always have someone who's able to answer questions and will be sharing information about it in both of the vehicles. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for addressing that. Let's see. So what if, do you sponsor an all women trip to the Cotswolds, or can I put one together?
That is a great question. I don't think presently there is an all women's trip, but it is something that we are working on throughout many of the itineraries and our programs that we run all over the place. So because I think England is, it's in its second year, I don't think we have a specific plan for a women's only trip, but certainly down the line, if there is interest in it. So talk to your folks at NatHab about it, that's something, if that is of interest to you, then talk to them about it, because if we know that the interest is there, then it'll happen. And of course, if you've got a group of women and you want to do that, then again, talk to your adventure specialists and they can, I'm sure, figure out ways to help make that happen. So yeah, it's really cool. More women being in science and in research and in agriculture and in education. And it's a really cool thing that there are so many women that are becoming really prominent figures in this. So the women's only trips are really cool that we're starting to be able to do them across the globe. So one day I imagine it could exist, but I don't think at present it does.
So can you say what the average age of the guests on the trip would be?
We have had it quite variable, but I would say probably it's similar to many of the other itineraries too, if you've traveled with NatHab. So probably mid 60s into 70s. But I've had people on my trips heli hiking in the Canadian Rockies who are in their 80s, and also have people who, you know, are much younger. We've got family groups that come on here and, you know, have 20-year-olds who are coming out on all of these different trips. But I would say on average, it is probably about mid-60s.
So let's talk about precipitation for just a second here. So could you say what the average precipitation per day is going to be? And will we get it every day?
We have it up here, and so this is kind of average. I don't think that will not be per day. I've had entire trips where I have zero rain, but I've also had trips where, you know, it'll rain in the morning, and I don't find England, I've not in my experience found that we'll have like heavy rain pour for like days on end. It's not like that, but you might have like a sprinkle in the morning and then it'll be sunny and clear in the afternoon. I don't find it's not like we're in a rainforest or anything like that. You're not on, you know, the west coast of Canada or the States where they're getting a massive amount of rain. But we kind of go into it expecting that there might be rainfall each day. So again, I bring my raincoat with me every day. Also good for a windbreak if it's going to be quite windy. But the majority of the time we do have really nice weather when we are in England. So yeah, I had entire trips last year where we had zero rain, but also have other trips where half sunny and half cloudy and rainy a bit, but rain doesn't overtake our itineraries. I've never had it overtake an itinerary, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Just have a raincoat with you.
Great, thank you. So is there any books or reading materials or websites I can go to help prepare for coming on the trip, whether it's, you know, the route we're taking or the history of the area or ecology? Anything you could point us to?
So in the pre-departure briefing, they oftentimes have in for like suggested book readings. You can also look up things about the Cotswolds Way, which is kind of one of the main hiking trails. It's a really long, extensive hiking trail. We do a small section of it and other trails that we can do. My favorite topic about it, and there's lots of different books that you can get about it, is I love looking at the rewilding projects. My England books are sitting across from me right now, so I'm trying to look at some of the ones that I have. I have a book that's called Wilding by Isabella Tree, which I think was incredible. What other ones do I have up here? Another one that's called Feral, but that's like one of my favorite subjects that I'm super passionate about is I think the rewilding projects and looking at that stuff I think is really fascinating. I also do tend to bring a wildflower book as well as like a wildlife, you know, bird ID books. But yeah, the pre-departure briefing oftentimes has a good book list if you're wanting to do some stuff in there. Books on Oxford too. You're welcome to read things on Oxford because then you kind of go in with a bit more knowledge and you can probably ask some more questions based on that. But yeah, lots of cool books.
Great. Well, unfortunately, that's going to be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'm going to throw it back to you for some closing comments.
Yeah, thanks guys. Again, I hope if you've already booked or if you're thinking about booking that you're even more pumped about the itinerary. Again, it's different. It's so different than many of the other NatHab trips, right? We're not going to look at polar bears or northern lights or something like that. That's what we're going for. We're going to learn about culture and history and how that's changed over time and how that change can obviously has been bad, but like it's very inspirational. I find this trip about ways that we can move forward and yeah, I don't know. I just think it's such a cool itinerary with such incredible messaging to go home with. And of course, like going to get to see birds and going eating incredible food. Did I mention incredible food in England and, you know, historic pubs? It's so variable, this itinerary, that yeah, I just think it's really cool. It's a really fascinating place and a lot more going on there than you thought that there was. So I hope that's what you think now. And if you come join us this year on trips or in future years, it's an incredible trip, and I'm excited for people to get to experience. Just get to experience it because it's super cool.
Leanne, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. If you're interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, give us a call at the number on your screen, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.